All those lovely books behind me.
Uh-huh. All right. I am here today with Shoshana Edwards, who is a lifelong fan of science fiction and fantasy, who recently wrote Death Lives in the Water, her first urban fantasy novel, with more to come from Ring of Fire Press. And I have asked Shoshana to come talk today because she has two degrees, advanced degrees, one in neuropsychology and another in linguistics. And so I think she is coming to talk about language in a particularly interestingly informed way, and has focused on how language changes under stress, and particularly with cases of dementia and various types of sociopaths. So I wanted to start off, Shoshana, by saying hello and asking you,
Hi.
how has this influenced your writing? Do you have characters where this has crept in to inform the way they talk?
Well, to a degree. Yeah, I mean, I hadn't specifically paid attention to it because I'm one of these people that I sort of write what I hear in my head. I write the way I read, which is a very immersive experience. And uh, I think especially with my lead character in Death Lives in the Water, Jim Birch, the sheriff. Um, I went back and reread the book and fascinated myself because Jim arrives in town having come from being a big city detective, and arrives in this little town in Missouri that's separated from everything and suddenly finds himself compelled to offer to be their sheriff because their sheriff has died of a heart attack. And it's interesting that Jim is very, very professional, very crisp, very precise in the way he talks. And as the book progresses and more people die, Jim becomes more and more linguistically a member of the communities he has joined, which means that he begins to wander just a bit off of the road of scientific forensics and into spirituality and possibilities. Possibilities haven't been a part of Jim's life. And it's interesting to see him sort of relax and start using more relaxed language, more language of community rather than language of self. And I think that language of community is what's informing my book. And perhaps my rather intense belief in the value of community informs the discussion more than my linguistics background.
That's awesome. I really, it's a great way to come at the character and show the character's change. I love that.
Yeah.
Um, I think that right now, stories of community are more important than ever. And I think you agree with me. I
Oh,
was
yeah.
curious right now with modern day politics, we see lots of narratives, often at war with each other. And I was curious how your perspective has allowed you to perceive current politics. What would you say about it?
Well, okay. First of all, for sake of truth and full disclosure, I'm a raving liberal.
Oh my
um,
goodness.
I'm probably extremely far left, although not as far left as many of my friends, but I've always been a liberal. And it's kind of interesting because I grew up in a very conservative family. And, I was a black sheep because I believed in all these things. But anyway, that being said, what I'm seeing and what disturbs me is that on one side we have the language of me, and on the other side, we have the language of us. And the language of me is very aggressive. It's very defensive. It's very protective of the self. And the language of us is a language of compromise, a language of community, a language of inclusion. And those two are just at war with each other. And what disturbs me the most is that I see very little give on either side. I see very little attempt by the people who use the language of us to understand why people might cling to the language of me and vice versa. I will say, again, with the caveat of where I come from, that it seems to me that the people who cling to the language of me, uh, sorry, politics comes in, who are mostly followers of Trump, are far more willing to be aggressive, to attack, to demean, to belittle. And I don't want to see the people who use the language of us, language of community, become aggressive and attack, even though it was fun to watch Biden call him a clown. But, even Biden said I could have used better words. There's just, it's like somebody has built a wall and we're on either sides and nobody's taking out a brick and looking through the wall and saying, hey, what's really going on over there? Does
I
this
think
make any sense?
I think that's a beautiful analogy, and I think you're absolutely right. And one of the things that I've read recently was someone saying we can't continue to say we're the good guys if we don't continue to be good guys and not stoop to bad tactics.
But even the good guys do have to defend themselves. I mean, you
Yes.
look at Gandhi, you look at Martin Luther King Jr., other people, from pacifists to people who just, conscientious resistance,
Yeah.
they didn't let themselves get stomped on.
Right. Right.
And you can't let yourself get stomped on. I think what I'm most concerned about right now is I've been watching the failure of Trump's language. And over 4 years, I've been watching the disintegration of his ability to put together a complete sentence, to hold on to a thought, to keep a train of thought going. This is not something that has always been there. If you go back a few years and look at some of the tapes, listen to some of the speeches, he was far more coherent. And what concerned me and what concerns me terribly right now is the debate concerned me because yes, he was a bully. Yes, he was interrupting, but we saw someone who was putting together coherent sentences. And that tells me that there was some kind of drug going on
Uh,
because this is not unscripted Trump. And this is not, even when he's scripted, he tends to go off and use these grandiose words. And that didn't happen. That was a stranger on that stage in many ways linguistically. And the tweets that we see coming out of the White House now definitely is the stuff that you could expect to see from someone who is roided up, steroids up to the eyeballs.
yeah.
And God, I fear the crash that's going to happen when, they take away the dexamethasone and what's going to happen. Um, because the language is the way people speak, the words they use, the coherence of their sentences tells you a lot about where they're at.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have someone who overnight goes from fragmented, grandiose language to coherent but loud and boisterous sentences, something's happened.
Yeah.
And we need it's a security risk. We're in danger.
And so I absolutely agree with you. And so let's turn right now at this moment in time. We
Sure.
have just seen Trump discharge himself from Walter Reed and then make a speech which was it's I just would love to get your take on that speech, actually.
Um, I'm sorry, I kind of have been trying to avoid the news
Oh,
lately
no, no,
because,
no, that's
but
totally cool. I frequently avoid it. But just like he was, I think you've seen, let's shift that because you have seen these tweets come out
yeah,
of Walter Reed that are very indicative of someone
well,
who is steroided to the gills,
well,
right?
the tweet storm after he got back to the White House was
Yeah,
unreal. I
yeah,
mean, all caps and short bursts and it's like just somebody whose brain is on steroids and going full blast. I mean, I'm remembering it was a few years ago I had a terrible reaction to a drug and they gave me prednisone,
mm.
which I had to take for 6 weeks. And for 6 weeks, I was clinging to the ceiling going, yeah, and and my body was tight and I wanted to throw things and I wanted to strangle anybody who came. It was just, it was horrible. And the drug he's on is 5 times as strong as that. And I just cannot imagine the storm that's going on in an already damaged brain. Now, I say already damaged brain simply because it's easy to say he talks like somebody who isn't a reader, because the more you read, the more you tend to use full sentences and colorful language and string together lots of things. But the fragmentation of sentences isn't just the whole problem, it's the repetition of words.
Mm.
As if, if I tell you it's big often enough, you'll finally believe that it's big. Um, that's what people do when they're in the early stages of various kinds of dementia. They, you know, I have a close family member,
Yeah,
and he'll say, I don't know. I really don't know. No, I really, really don't know. Like, I don't know. I wish I knew what was going on inside of that brain. We all
yeah,
do, and all we can do is observe the outer symptoms.
yeah,
But that's certainly what Trump did. And now suddenly he isn't doing that. And that is worrisome
right. I
because there's been a big change. I don't really quite recognize the speech that's going on. I have to say that I find Joe Biden admirable because he has continued to be calm and respectful and for the most part behave with dignity. I can't blame him for his two outbursts in the debate, but you compare Biden's ability to put together full sentences
Mhm. Mhm.
and to carry through a full thought and to do it under stress when he's a stutterer is amazing.
Yeah,
Now, getting back to how does this inform my language in my books, I have a character in Death Lives in the Water, Jeremy. I don't want to say too much about him because I want people who are listening to read the book. But Jeremy is a damaged soul, physically and emotionally, severely damaged. And it was an interesting thing for me to write Jeremy out of his isolation, out of his self denigration, and into really believing that he could be and was a part of the community and watching his language change. And I also played with having him talk to himself in one way and to other people in a totally different way.
that's awesome.
So I love language in case you haven't figured it out. I love words,
Yeah,
you know?
that's. I think that's
Some,
the best thing for a writer. I mean, that's why we write, right? We like the words. We love playing with them.
Yeah. Well, somebody, I just saw a post. I can't remember what they said about art, but they said about music. It, we use music to paint time. And I think writers use language to paint the imagination.
Ooh, that's lovely. Like that. All right. I'm going to close with that because I
Okay.
don't think there's any better way to do it. That was absolutely lovely.
Wait, may I show the book?
Yes, please do. That would be awesome.
Okay. It's Death Lives in the Water, and you can find it on Amazon as an ebook or as a paperback.
Awesome. And I will
And the
put
next book is coming out soon, and it's called Death Lives in the Forest.
Death Lives in the Forest. Awesome. I will put
Yeah,
the links to both the book and your Amazon page
thank
and
you.
the description. So thank you again.
This has been fun. Thank you a lot.